I still remember the exact moment my world collapsed. After 8 years of transforming my family's struggling pharmacy chain into a thriving $12 million business, my father looked across the mahogany dining table at our traditional Sunday dinner and said, "We've decided Mark will be taking over Wilson Family Pharmacy when we retire next month." His eyes, so similar to my own, didn't even have the decency to look apologetic. My mother smiled tightly beside him, while my brother's face broke into a triumphant grin. I felt the air leave my lungs, but somehow managed to keep my expression neutral as I reached for my water glass, buying time to compose myself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in Lakeside, Michigan, the Wilson Family Pharmacy was more than just a business. It was our legacy. My grandfather had started with a single storefront in 1965, and by the time my father took over, we had 3 locations across the Y County. I had practically grown up behind that counter, counting pill bottles after school and learning customer names. It was in my blood. When I told my parents I wanted to pursue a pharmacy degree, they were thrilled. Following in the family footsteps, my father would proudly tell anyone who would listen. What he didn't expect was that I would follow it up with an MBA. "What does a small-town pharmacist need with business school?" he'd asked. But I had bigger visions for our family legacy. Mark, my older brother by 3 years, had never shown any interest in the family business. While I was memorizing drug interactions and learning accounting principles, he was jumping from one venture to another. A fitness center that closed after 8 months, a food truck that he abandoned when winter came, and most recently, a sports memorabilia shop that was hemorrhaging money faster than he could stock it. After graduating, I came home to Lakeside with big plans. Our family business was stagnating, still operating like it was 1995 in a world that had moved firmly into the digital age. The first year was brutal. My father resisted every suggestion I made, from computerizing our inventory system to creating a prescription delivery service for our elderly customers. "We've been doing just fine for decades," he would say, dismissing my ideas with a wave of his hand. But we weren't doing fine. Profit margins were shrinking, a national pharmacy chain had opened across town, and we were losing customers daily. It took showing him the stark reality of our financial statements for him to finally relent. 3 months, he'd said. "You have 3 months to prove these changes are worth the investment." I didn't need 3 months. Within 6 weeks, our prescription fill times had decreased by 30%, customer satisfaction scores were climbing, and we'd started bringing back customers we'd lost. By the end of the year, we'd opened a 4th location. The next 8 years were a whirlwind of growth and innovation. I developed an app that allowed customers to refill prescriptions with a tap, expanded our services to include immunizations and basic health screenings, and negotiated better contracts with insurance providers. We went from 4 locations to 11 across the state, and our annual revenue climbed from just under $2 million to over $12 million. Through it all, my father gradually stepped back, allowing me to take the reins while he and my mother enjoyed semi-retirement. Mark occasionally floated through, usually when one of his latest ventures was failing, offering unsolicited advice before disappearing again. I didn't mind. This was my domain now, and everyone knew it. Or so I thought. Which brings me back to that Sunday dinner. The one where my father casually mentioned that my brother, who couldn't keep a goldfish alive, let alone a business, would be taking over everything I had built. "Mark has really matured," my mother added, as if that explained everything. "He's settled down with Jessica now, and they're talking about starting a family. He needs stability." I stared at her in disbelief. And what about me? What about everything I've done for this business? My father cleared his throat. "Emma, you've done wonderful work, and we're grateful. But this business has always been meant to stay in the family, to be passed down through the generations." "I am family," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "You know what your father means," my mother interjected, her voice dropping to that soothing tone she used when she thought I was being difficult. "Mark is the firstborn. He's going to carry on the Wilson name." "Of course, because despite my pharmacy license hanging on the wall, despite my MBA, despite the fact that I had single-handedly saved our family business from obsolescence, I was still just Emma, the daughter, the one who would eventually marry and take someone else's name, whose achievements were temporary stepping stones until the rightful heir was ready to assume his place. My brother at least had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "Don't worry, Em. You'll still have a place in the company. Maybe you can run the marketing department or something." Marketing department. We didn't even have a marketing department. I had handled all of that myself, along with operations, expansion, staffing, and everything else while he had been busy running his sports memorabilia shop into the ground. I looked around the table at my family, my father with his expectant expression, as if waiting for my gratitude that they'd found a place for me in my own company. My mother with her pleading eyes, silently begging me not to make a scene. And Mark already mentally redecorating my office. "When does this transition happen?" I asked, my voice so calm it surprised even me. "We'll start next week," my father replied. "We want to make the announcement at the company picnic on Saturday. Give everyone time to adjust before we officially retire at the end of the month." 6 days. They were giving me 6 days before pulling the rug out from under me. I nodded slowly, taking another sip of water. "I see." The conversation shifted then to Jessica's latest charity project and my parents' upcoming anniversary trip. No one seemed to notice that I had stopped participating, that I was mentally calculating exactly what I needed to do before next Saturday. Because while they had been planning my professional demise, I had been quietly securing my future. They just didn't know it yet. After dinner, as everyone moved to the living room for coffee, I slipped away, claiming a headache. It wasn't entirely a lie. My temples were throbbing with the beginning of a migraine, but more than that, I needed space to think, to plan. I drove back to my downtown apartment, the lakefront views that had once brought me such peace now seeming to mock me. As soon as I closed my door behind me, I pulled out my phone and dialed Olivia. "They're giving the business to Mark," I said without preamble when she answered. "What? Your business? The one you built?" Her outrage was immediate and validating. "Apparently, he's the firstborn and needs stability now that he's thinking about starting a family," I replied, kicking off my heels and sinking onto my sofa. "That's the most sexist, outdated—" She stopped herself. "What are you going to do?" I gazed out at the dark waters of Lake Michigan, a strange calm settling over me. "I'm going to take what's mine." The next morning, I was at my office by 6 a.m., hours before anyone else would arrive. I needed time to gather everything I needed: copies of financial statements, growth projections, contracts with our suppliers and insurance providers. All things I already had access to as the de facto CEO. But now I was viewing them with new eyes, looking for the leverage I would need. By the time my assistant arrived at 8:30, I had compiled a comprehensive portfolio of my contributions to Wilson Family Pharmacy over the past 8 years. The growth metrics were undeniable. 846% increase in revenue, expansion from 4 locations to 11, customer base growth from 3,200 to over 27,000. All under my leadership, with minimal input from my father and absolutely none from Mark. "Grace, I need you to schedule a meeting with Gregory Bennett for today if possible," I told my assistant as she brought in my morning coffee. "Mr. Bennett, the family lawyer?" she asked, surprise evident in her voice. In 8 years, I had met with him exactly twice. Once when we were expanding to our 6th location and needed to update some paperwork, and again when we restructured the company to accommodate our growth. "Yes, tell him it's urgent." She nodded and disappeared to make the call. 20 minutes later, she was back, He can see you at 11:30. I spent the next 2 hours reviewing the company bylaws and ownership structure. On paper, my father still owned 70% of the business, with my mother holding 20%, and Mark and I each having 5%. Those shares had been gifted to us on our respective 21st birthdays, a token gesture that my father had never expected to mean anything since he maintained controlling interest, except there was something he had forgotten. 4 years ago, when we were expanding rapidly and needed additional capital, my father had been reluctant to take on debt. Instead, I had contributed $750,000 of my own savings to fund the expansion, in exchange for an additional 25% stake in the company. The paperwork had been drawn up properly and filed, but we had never updated the family about the change in ownership structure. It simply hadn't seemed important at the time. Now, it was everything. At 11:25, I gathered my files and headed to Gregory Bennett's office, 6 blocks from our company headquarters. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The distinguished lawyer had been handling the Wilson family's legal affairs since before I was born, and I knew he had a soft spot for me. Still, his loyalty was officially to my father. "Emma, what a pleasant surprise," he greeted me, rising from behind his imposing desk as his secretary showed me in. "Your assistant said it was urgent?" "It is," I confirmed, taking a seat and placing my portfolio on his desk. "My father informed me yesterday that he plans to transfer leadership of Wilson Family Pharmacy to Mark when he and my mother retire at the end of the month." Gregory's bushy eyebrows rose slightly. "I see. And you have concerns about this transition?" "More than concerns, Gregory. I have objections. Legal objections." I opened my portfolio and slid across the document that would change everything. The investment agreement from 4 years ago, signed by both my father and me, notarized and filed appropriately. Gregory adjusted his glasses and reviewed the document, his expression giving nothing away. After a moment, he looked up. "This gives you a 30% stake in the company, combined with your original 5%. "Which means my father no longer has controlling interest," I stated. "His 70% would now be 45%, with my mother at 20%, Mark at 5%, and me at 30%. If my parents are genuinely retiring and transferring my father's shares to Mark, that would give him 50% and me 30%, with my mother retaining 20%. Gregory nodded slowly. "That is correct, based on this agreement. However, as majority shareholder, even at 50% versus your 30%, Mark would still have controlling interest." I smiled then, sliding across another document. "Except for the shareholder agreement we all signed when we restructured 3 years ago. Section 7, paragraph 3 specifically states that any major business decisions, including changes in executive leadership, require a 75% shareholder approval." The lawyer's eyes widened almost imperceptibly as he reviewed the clause. It had been included as a safeguard when we restructured, ensuring that no single stakeholder could make drastic changes without buy-in from the others. At the time, my father had held what he believed was 70% ownership, so the clause seemed inconsequential. He would only need another 5% from either my mother or one of us children to reach the threshold. But with the updated ownership structure, even with my mother's 20% support, my father and Mark together would only control 65% of the company, 10% short of what they needed to force this transition. "I see," Gregory said finally, removing his glasses and pinching the bridge of his nose. "Does your father realize this?" "I don't believe he remembers the details of either agreement," I replied. "He's been increasingly hands-off with the business aspects for years now." Gregory sighed, a sound of weary resignation. "Emma, what exactly are you hoping to achieve here? A legal battle with your family would be messy and painful for everyone, Involved. I leaned forward, keeping my voice steady. I'm not looking for a battle, Gregory. I'm looking for recognition of what I've built. This company would have failed years ago without my intervention. I've poured my life into it, expanded it beyond anything my father or grandfather could have imagined, and now they want to hand it to Mark, who has never shown any interest or aptitude for this business, simply because he's the son and I'm the daughter. The lawyer's expression softened. He had known me since I was a child, had watched me grow into the businesswoman, sitting before him now. What would you like me to do? I'd like you to prepare documentation outlining the current ownership structure and the requirements for leadership transition based on our shareholder agreement. And I'd like you to be present tomorrow when I meet with my parents and Mark to discuss this situation. Gregory considered this for a long moment before nodding. I can do that. But Emma, consider carefully before you proceed. Legal rights aside, this could permanently damage your relationship with your family. I thought about Sunday dinner, about how easily they had dismissed 8 years of my life, about how they had made plans to take away everything I had built without even consulting me. Some damages can't be undone, Gregory, I said quietly. They've made their choice. Now I'm making mine. That evening, I called my parents and asked them to meet me at their house the following day, suggesting that Mark should be there as well. I've been thinking about the transition, I explained, keeping my tone light. I have some ideas I'd like to discuss with everyone. My father sounded pleased. That's my girl. I knew you'd come around. If only he knew. The next day, I arrived at my parents' lakefront home 15 minutes early, giving me time to compose myself before the storm that was about to hit. Gregory arrived 5 minutes after me, looking solemn in his gray suit, carrying a leather briefcase filled with the documentation we had prepared. My mother greeted us warmly, though her eyes reflected confusion at the lawyer's presence. Gregory, we weren't expecting you. Is everything all right? Everything's fine, Diane, he assured her with practiced ease. Emma asked me to join your discussion today, as there are some legal aspects to consider in this transition. My father entered the room then, followed closely by Mark. Both men froze momentarily at the sight of Gregory, a flicker of uncertainty crossing my father's face before his confident demeanor reasserted itself. Well, this looks serious, my father said with a forced chuckle, taking a seat at the head of the dining table. Emma said she had some ideas about the transition, but I didn't realize we needed legal counsel for that. Actually, Dad, I began, my heart pounding but my voice steady. I asked Gregory to join us because there are some important details about the company's ownership structure that need to be clarified before any transition can occur. Mark snorted. What's to clarify? Dad owns the company and he's decided I'm taking over. Seems pretty straightforward to me. Gregory cleared his throat, opening his briefcase and extracting a folder. Actually, Mr. Wilson, the ownership structure is a bit more complex than you might recall. As the lawyer began distributing copies of the documents we had prepared, I watched the color drain from my father's face. He remembered. Maybe not all the details, but enough to know what was coming. 4 years ago, Gregory continued, his professional tone unwavering, when the company needed capital for expansion, Emma invested $750,000 of her personal funds in exchange for an additional 25% ownership stake. This agreement was properly executed and filed. He tapped the document in front of them. This adjusted the ownership structure to 45% for Robert, 20% for Diane, 5% for Mark, and 30% for Emma. My mother gasped softly, looking between my father and me with widening eyes. Mark's expression darkened as he quickly did the math. Furthermore, Gregory pressed on, the shareholder agreement executed 3 years ago during company restructuring includes a clause requiring 75% shareholder approval for major business decisions, including changes in executive leadership. The silence that followed was deafening. My father stared at the documents before him, his jaw tight. What exactly are you saying? Mark finally demanded, glaring at me. I'm saying, I replied evenly, that Dad doesn't have the authority to simply hand over leadership of the company to you. Any leadership transition requires 75% shareholder approval, and even with Mom's 20% support, you and Dad together only control 65% of the company. My father's hand came down hard on the table. This is absurd. I built this company. It's mine. To decide who takes over. No, Dad, I countered, maintaining my composure. You built the original business. I built it into what it is today. And legally, you no longer have controlling interest. You've been planning this, my mother accused, her voice quivering with emotion. All this time, you knew. I haven't been planning anything, Mom. I invested in the company because it needed capital to grow. Dad signed the agreement because he knew it was the right business decision. The only planning happening here has been your secret arrangements to push me out of the company I saved and expanded. Mark pushed back from the table, his face flushed with anger. This is just like you, Emma, always having to prove you're smarter than everyone else. Dad wants me to take over because I'm family-oriented, because I'll preserve the Wilson legacy. You're just in it for yourself. Is that what he told you? I asked, genuinely curious. That I'm not family-oriented enough to run a family business? That the woman who increased our annual revenue by 846% is somehow less committed to our legacy than the man who has started and abandoned 3 separate businesses in the past decade? That's enough, my father interjected, his voice dangerously low. This isn't about your qualifications, Emma. This is about respect, about honoring your father's wishes. I met his gaze directly. And what about honoring my contributions? What about respecting what I've accomplished? You were doing your job, he replied dismissively, the job I gave you. And there it was, the fundamental disconnect. In his mind, everything I had achieved was merely an extension of his generosity in allowing me to work in his business. My innovations, my expansions, my tireless efforts to modernize and grow our family legacy, all of it reduced to an employee, dutifully following orders. I took a deep breath. Gregory, could you explain the legal options available given the current ownership structure? The lawyer nodded, seemingly relieved to return to the concrete world of legal facts rather than family emotions. Based on the shareholder agreement, any leadership transition would require approval from shareholders representing at least 75% of the company. Currently, that would mean either Emma would need to support the transfer of leadership to Mark, or Robert and Diane would need to support Emma's continued leadership. Or option 3, I added quietly. I could use my 30% stake to block any leadership transition, forcing a stalemate that would effectively prevent either of us from taking full control. My father's eyes narrowed. You would risk damaging the company just to spite your brother? I'm not the one putting personal feelings above the company's welfare, I replied. I'm the one who has devoted 8 years to building this business, who understands every aspect of its operations, who has relationships with our suppliers, our insurance partners, our customers. Mark has none of that knowledge or experience. I can learn, Mark insisted. In a month, before Dad and Mom retire, you can learn 8 years of pharmaceutical business operations, vendor relationships, insurance negotiations, staff management, and regulatory compliance in 4 weeks? For the first time, uncertainty flickered across my brother's face. He hadn't considered the complexity of what he was taking on. He had only seen the title, the office, the prestige of being CEO. My mother, ever the peacemaker, leaned forward. There must be a compromise we can reach. Emma, surely you don't want to tear the family apart over this. I don't, I agreed, softening my tone as I turned to her. But I'm not the one who started this. You and Dad made a decision that affects my life, my career, everything I've worked for, without even consulting me. You were going to announce it publicly before even giving me a chance to respond privately. Gregory cleared his throat. If I may suggest, given the circumstances, perhaps a cooling-off period would be beneficial. No announcements, no changes, until everyone has had time to consider their positions and the potential implications. My father scoffed. And in the meantime, we just pretend nothing has changed? Nothing has changed, Dad, I pointed out. I'm still running the company successfully, just as I have been for years. The only difference is that now everyone at this table knows exactly where we stand legally. Mark pushed his chair back and stood. This is unbelievable. After everything Mom and Dad have done for you, this is how you repay them? By threatening legal action against your own family? I'm not threatening anything, I replied calmly. I'm simply ensuring that my contributions are recognized and respected, something that shouldn't require legal documentation, but apparently does. My father stood as well, his expression a mask of disappointment that once would have crushed me. I never thought my own daughter would use legalities against her family. Your grandfather would be ashamed. I met his gaze steadily. My grandfather built a business to provide for his family's future. I've honored that legacy by ensuring the business will continue to thrive for generations to come. I think he would be proud. Without another word, my father left the room, followed closely by Mark. My mother lingered, her eyes filled with tears. Emma, please reconsider, she pleaded. Family is more important than business. I agree, I said softly. That's why I'm so hurt that you and Dad were willing to dismiss everything I've contributed to this family's business without a second thought. That's why I'm fighting for recognition of what I've built, not just for me, but for our entire family's future. She shook her head sadly and followed my father and brother, leaving me alone with Gregory. The lawyer began gathering his documents, his movements deliberate and unhurried. That went about as expected, he commented, closing his briefcase with a soft click. Yes, I agreed, feeling strangely hollow despite having achieved exactly what I came for. It did. What I didn't know then was that this was only the beginning. The battle for Wilson Family Pharmacy had just begun, and it would test not only my business acumen but also the very definition of family loyalty. The next morning dawned gray and misty over Lake Michigan, matching my mood perfectly as I drove to the main office of Wilson Family Pharmacy. After yesterday's confrontation, I expected some fallout, but I wasn't sure what form it would take. What I didn't expect was to find my brother's car already in the parking lot at 7:15 a.m. Mark had never voluntarily arrived at work before 9:30 in his life. I parked beside his sleek BMW, noting with grim amusement that he'd chosen the spot usually, reserved for the chief financial officer. A small power play, but telling. Taking a deep breath, I gathered my belongings and headed inside, key card ready. The front desk was unmanned at this hour. Our receptionist, Jennifer, wouldn't arrive until 8 QMO, but I could hear voices coming from my office at the end of the hall. My office. The fact that Mark felt entitled to occupy my space without permission made my blood simmer, but I forced my expression into neutral professionalism as I approached. Through the glass partition, I could see Mark sitting behind my desk, leaning back in my chair, feet propped up on my polished mahogany desk surface. Across from him sat Thomas Reynolds, our head pharmacist, looking uncomfortable and slightly confused. Both men turned as I pushed open the door. Emma, Mark greeted, not bothering to remove his feet from my desk. I was just getting acquainted with Tom here, discussing some ideas for when I take over next month. Thomas's eyes darted between us, clearly sensing the tension. He'd been with the company for 20 years, had seen me grow up running around the original store, and had been one of my strongest supporters when I first proposed modernizing our operations. Good morning, Thomas, I said pleasantly. Would you mind giving my brother and me a moment? I believe we have some family matters to discuss. The older man nodded gratefully and stood. Of course. I should check on the inventory shipment anyway. He slipped past me with an apologetic glance. When the door closed behind him, I set my bag down on the conference table and regarded my brother coolly. Comfortable? Mark smirked, making no move to vacate my chair. Just getting a feel for my new office might change a few things. It's a bit feminine for my taste. I glanced around at the deliberately neutral space, with its minimalist design and the single-framed photograph of our grandfather standing in front of the original Wilson Pharmacy in 1965. Yes, terribly feminine, I remarked dryly. The mahogany and navy blue are practically screaming estrogen. His smirk faltered slightly. Dad called me last night, he said, changing tactics. He's pretty upset. I imagine he is, I replied, remaining standing. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me take a visitor's chair in my own office. He said you're being unreasonable, that you've forgotten everything he's done for you. Mark's feet finally came off the desk as he leaned forward. He gave you a chance when no one else would have. I couldn't help the short laugh that escaped me. No one else would have given a licensed pharmacist with an MBA a chance to work in a pharmacy? That's your perspective? You know what I mean. This was his business, his legacy. He let you play at being in charge for a while, but now it's time for things to go back to how they should be. I studied my brother's face, trying to determine if he actually believed what he was saying or if he was simply parroting our father's outdated views. With Mark, it was always hard to tell where the performance ended and genuine conviction began. Did Dad also mention the legal reality of the situation? I asked. That he doesn't have the authority to make this decision unilaterally? Mark's expression darkened. He mentioned your little legal loophole, yes. Very clever, Emma. Always finding ways to manipulate situations to your advantage. It's not a loophole, Mark. It's a binding legal agreement that Dad willingly signed because he needed my money to save this company. I moved closer, placing my palms flat on the desk and looking him directly in the eye. But let me ask you something. Why do you even want this job? You've never shown any interest in pharmacy. You've never bothered to learn the first thing about this business. What's really going on here? For a brief moment, something vulnerable flickered across his face. Something that looked almost like shame, before his defensive mask slammed back into place. Maybe I've changed. Maybe I'm ready to settle down and take on some responsibility. After 3 failed businesses in 8 years? His jaw tightened. At least I tried to build something of my own instead of just taking over Dad's company. The irony of his statement was so absurd I almost laughed again. Mark, that's exactly what you're trying to do now. Take over Dad's company. The difference is that I actually rebuilt it into something better, while you just want to slide into a ready-made CEO position without doing any of the work. He stood abruptly, coming around the desk to tower over me. Mark had always used his height to intimidate, ever since we were children. You think you're so much better than me, don't you? Little Miss Perfect with her degrees and her spreadsheets. But you don't understand what Dad really wants for this company. I held my ground, refusing to step back. And you do? He wants it to stay in the family, the Wilson name carried forward. You'll get married eventually, change your name, have kids with someone else's family legacy. I'm the one who'll keep the Wilson name alive. There it was, the same outdated thinking my father had spouted for years, now coming from my brother's mouth. As if my chromosomes somehow made my contributions less valuable, less permanent. Tell me something, Mark, I said quietly. Your friend Jason Chen took over his mother's accounting firm last year, right? Even though he has a sister? He frowned, caught off guard by the change in topic. What does that have to do with anything? And the Henderson brothers all inherited equal shares in their parents' restaurant chain, despite only the youngest having any culinary experience. And when Bill Ferguson died, his daughter Sarah became CEO of Ferguson Construction, even though she has 2 brothers. What's your point, Emma? My point is that this outdated notion that daughters are somehow less capable of carrying on a family business is exactly that, outdated. It doesn't happen in other families we know. It's not some universal business principle. It's just Dad's prejudice, which you've apparently inherited along with his expectation of being handed a successful company you did nothing to build. Mark's face flushed with anger. You always have to make everything about gender, don't you? Maybe it's not about you being a woman. Maybe it's about you being you, always thinking you know better than everyone else, never respecting Dad's experience or vision. His vision was going to bankrupt this company, I retorted. His experience wasn't enough to compete in today's market. I respect what Dad built, but I also recognize that he was 5 years away from closing our doors for good when I stepped in. And you never let anyone forget it, he snapped. The great savior Emma, swooping in to rescue the family business that the men were too incompetent to run properly. I took a deep breath, recognizing that we were getting nowhere. Mark, why are you really here this morning? What did you hope to accomplish by setting up camp in my office before normal business hours? He hesitated, then sighed, some of the aggression leaving his posture. Dad suggested I start shadowing you, learning the ropes, so to speak. He thinks if I show genuine interest in the business, you might reconsider your position. I raised an eyebrow. So this wasn't about staking a claim to my office or asserting dominance? A flicker of sheepishness crossed his face. Maybe a little of that too. Despite everything, I found myself fighting a small smile. This was classic Mark, part bluster, part genuine effort, all wrapped up in terrible execution. If you want to learn about the business, I'll teach you, I said finally. Not because I'm planning to step aside, but because you're a shareholder and you should understand what you own. But let's be clear. This is still my office, I'm still the CEO, and any transition of power will require my agreement, which I'm not currently inclined to give. Mark studied me for a long moment, clearly trying to decide if this was a victory or a defeat. And if I learn the business and prove I can handle it? Then we can revisit the conversation with actual facts rather than Dad's preferences and your assumptions, I replied evenly. But Mark, fair warning, this isn't running a sports memorabilia shop. Pharmaceutical business is complex, heavily regulated, and requires attention to detail that you've never been particularly known for. He bristled at that, but didn't argue. Fine. When do we start? I glanced at my watch. Staff meeting in 30 minutes. Find yourself a visitor badge at the front desk and be in the conference room by 8 as usual. And Mark? Yeah? Get out of my chair. After he left, I sank into my recently vacated seat, letting out a long breath. The confrontation had gone better than I'd expected, but I harbored no illusions that this represented any real change in my family's thinking. This was merely a tactical retreat while they regrouped. My phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. How are you holding up? Drinks tonight? I typed back a quick affirmative, then turned my attention to preparing for the staff meeting. If Mark was going to be shadowing me, I needed to be at the top of my game. Not that I had anything to prove. The numbers spoke for themselves, but I knew my brother would be watching for any sign of weakness, any mistake he could report back to our father. The morning staff meeting went smoothly, despite the distraction of Mark's presence. I introduced him simply as my brother Mark, who will be learning more about our operations over the coming weeks, offering no further explanation. The curious glances from my senior team told me they sensed something was off, but they were professionals. Questions would come later, in private. I led the team through our quarterly projections, new marketing initiatives, and updates on the inventory management system we'd implemented last month. Mark stayed uncharacteristically quiet, watching the proceedings with a furrowed brow as he struggled to follow discussions of pharmacy benefit managers, DIR fees, and specialty medication programs. Halfway through the meeting, my phone lit up with a text message from Gregory Bennett. Robert called, wants to meet this afternoon. My office, 3 p.m. I kept my expression neutral as I silenced the phone, but my mind was racing. What new approach? Was my father planning? Would he try to negotiate, or was this another attempt to pressure me into compliance? After the meeting, I assigned Mark to shadow Thomas in the pharmacy for the morning. Start with the basics, I told them both. Prescription workflow, insurance processing, inventory management. Thomas, don't hold back. He needs to understand the real complexity of what we do. Thomas nodded, though I could see the question in his eyes. I would explain the situation to my senior team soon, but not with Mark present. Once they departed, I called Grace into my office. My assistant had been with me for 5 years and knew virtually everything about my professional life, and quite a bit about my personal life as well. "Close the door, Grace," I said as she entered. "We need to talk." Her expression grew serious as she took a seat. "Is this about your brother suddenly appearing and following you around like a lost puppy?" I smiled despite myself. "Partly. There's a situation developing with my family that you should be aware of." Briefly, I outlined what had happened, my parents' decision to hand leadership to Mark, the revelation of my larger ownership stake, and the current stalemate. Grace listened without interrupting, her face growing increasingly outraged. "They can't be serious," she said when I finished. "Mark wouldn't last a week running this company." "That's not what my father believes," I replied. "And right now, Mark is operating under the assumption that he just needs to humor me for a while before taking over." Grace snorted. "Well, that should be entertaining to watch." "It might be, under different circumstances." I leaned forward. "But I need your help. My father wants to meet this afternoon at Gregory's office. I need you to prepare a comprehensive overview of our operational improvements and financial growth since I took over. Everything that demonstrates my impact on this business." "Consider it done," she replied without hesitation. "Anything else?" I hesitated. "Keep an eye on Mark, not obviously, but he's always been impulsive. I wouldn't put it past him to try something dramatic to prove himself to our father." She nodded. "I'll make sure Jennifer and the security team are aware he doesn't have authorization to access sensitive areas or financial information." "Thank you, Grace." I paused. "One more thing. If anyone from the staff asks about what's happening, it's a family matter being resolved privately," she finished for me. "No need for anyone to worry about the stability of the company or their jobs." I smiled gratefully. "What would I do without you?" "Hopefully you'll never have to find out," she replied with a wink as she stood to leave. "I'll have that report ready for you by 2:30. After Grace left, I turned to my computer and began preparing for the meeting with my father. I had no illusions about his intentions. He hadn't suddenly seen the light and decided to respect my contributions. This was a strategic move, another attempt to get what he wanted. The question was, what was he prepared to offer? And more importantly, what would it take for me to consider compromising? I spent the next hour reviewing our financial projections for the coming year. We were on track for another 15% growth in revenue, with plans to open our 12th location in Grand Rapids by the end of the quarter. The specialized compounding service I'd launched last year was already showing strong returns, and our Medicare Part D optimization program had saved our senior customers over $2.3 million collectively while increasing our prescription volume. All of this had happened under my leadership, with my vision. The thought of handing it over to Mark, watching him potentially undo years of my work through inexperience or indifference, made my stomach clench. My phone buzzed again, a text from my mother. "Please reconsider what you're doing, Emma. Your father is heartbroken." I stared at the message, a complex mix of emotions washing over me. Part of me wanted to respond sarcastically, asking where her concern had been when they were planning to push me out without a second thought. Another part felt the familiar tug of guilt that had been ingrained in me since childhood. I was the responsible one, the peacemaker, the one who was supposed to accommodate everyone else's needs and wants, but not this time. I set the phone aside without responding. My mother had made her choice, standing with my father as she always did, regardless of the fairness of his decisions. At 2 Laos, I received a text from Mark. Thomas is driving me crazy with inventory procedures. How much longer do I have to do this? I almost laughed. He'd lasted barely 4 hours in the pharmacy before getting restless. Until 3. Then you can go home. We'll continue tomorrow. His response came quickly. Tomorrow? How long is this shadowing thing supposed to last? As long as it takes for you to understand what running this business actually entails, I typed. Back. Could be weeks, might be months. There was a long pause before his next message appeared. Dad won't wait months. That's between you and Dad, I replied. I'm just offering you the education you claim to want. He didn't respond after that, and I turned my attention back to preparing for the meeting. At 2:30, Grace delivered a comprehensive report detailing the company's transformation under my leadership, complete with graphs, testimonials from key partners, and projections for future growth. The documentation was meticulous and undeniable. This is excellent, Grace. Thank you. Just stating the facts, she replied with a smile. Do you want me to call for a car to take you to Gregory's office? I shook my head. I'll drive myself. If Mark comes looking for me, tell him I had an appointment and we'll see him tomorrow morning. At 2:45, I gathered my materials and headed to my car. The drive to Gregory's office was short, but it gave me time to center myself, to prepare. For whatever my father might throw at me, by the time I parked in the visitor's space outside the law office, I felt calm and focused. Gregory's secretary ushered me directly into the conference room where my father was already waiting. He stood as I entered, his expression impossible to read. Emma, he greeted, his voice formal. Dad, I replied with a nod, taking the seat across from him. Where's Gregory? He'll join us in a few minutes. I asked for some time alone with you first. My father settled back into his chair, studying me with those penetrating blue eyes that had always seemed to see right through me when I was a child. You've put us all in a difficult position. I raised an eyebrow. I've put us in a difficult position. This isn't how things were supposed to go, he continued, ignoring my interjection. I had a plan for this company, for our family. A plan that didn't include me, I pointed out. He sighed, running a hand through his silver hair. Of course it included you, just not in the role you've become accustomed to. The role I've earned, I corrected. The role I've excelled in for 8 years. My father leaned forward. Emma, no one is disputing that you've done well. You've made improvements to the business, modernized operations, increased profitability. Those are all commendable achievements. But Wilson Family Pharmacy was always meant to be passed down to the next generation of Wilson men. It's tradition. It's how my father intended it, and his father before him. I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped me. Grandpa Wilson didn't have a daughter, and great-grandpa didn't even have a pharmacy. He was a farmer. So let's not pretend this is some ancient family tradition that can't possibly be broken. My father's jaw tightened. The point is, I've made my decision. Mark will be taking over the company. Except it's not your decision to make anymore, I replied evenly. Legally, you need my agreement, and I don't agree. So what are you proposing? He asked, an edge creeping into his voice. That you remain CEO indefinitely? That Mark never gets his chance to lead the family business? I set my folder on the table and opened it, revealing the first page of Grace's report. I'm proposing that leadership of this company should be based on merit, not gender, on capability, not birth order. Mark is capable, my father insisted. He just needs the opportunity to prove it. The opportunity that you never required him to earn? I pointed out. The opportunity you were ready to give him without any demonstration of his abilities or commitment. My father's expression hardened. I know my son. I know what he's capable of. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, Mark has demonstrated exactly one consistent trait in his adult life: the inability to commit to anything long-term. 3 failed businesses, Dad. 3. And you want to hand him a $12 million company that employs 78 people, serves thousands of patients, and represents 4 generations of our family's work? For a moment, doubt flickered in my father's eyes. I pressed my advantage, sliding the report across the table to him. Look at these numbers, Dad. Really look at them. Under my leadership, we've increased revenue by over 500%. We've expanded from 4 locations to 11. We've modernized every aspect of our operations, from inventory management to customer service to specialized pharmacy services. Our customer satisfaction ratings are the highest they've ever been. He glanced down at the report, frowning slightly as he skimmed the first page. And it's not just about the numbers, I continued. It's about the relationships I've built with our suppliers, our insurance partners, our community healthcare providers. It's about the trust our customers have in us. Mark knows nothing about any of that. My father looked up, his expression still resolute. He can learn, just as you did. I didn't just learn, Dad. I studied for years. Pharmacy school, business, school. I worked in every department of this company, from the stockroom to the dispensing counter. I put in the time and the effort to understand this business from the ground up. And Mark can do the same. So why hasn't he? I challenged. In 8 years, he's shown zero interest in the family business. He only wants it now because it's successful, because it represents power and prestige he hasn't been able to achieve on his own. My father's face flushed with anger. That's unfair, Emma. Your brother has been finding his own path. His own path that conveniently led back to the family business once I made it profitable, I retorted. Before my father could respond, the door opened and Gregory entered, carrying his own stack of folders. He paused, sensing the tension in the room. I hope I'm not interrupting, he said diplomatically. Not at all, my father replied, his voice tight. Emma was just explaining why she believes her brother is incapable of running the business. Gregory sighed as he took a seat at the head of the table. I see we're still at an impasse. Not necessarily, I said, straightening in my chair. I'm willing to consider a compromise. My father's eyebrows rose in surprise. What kind of compromise? A transition period, I proposed. Mark joins the company in a senior role, Chief Operations Officer perhaps. He spends 2 years learning every aspect of the business under my guidance. If, after those 2 years, he demonstrates the capability and commitment necessary to lead this company, we can revisit the question of succession. Gregory nodded approvingly. That seems like a reasonable approach. It gives Mark the opportunity to prove himself while ensuring the company remains in capable hands during the transition. My father frowned. 2 years is too long. 6 months should be sufficient. I shook my head. 6 months isn't enough time to learn even the basics of pharmaceutical business operations, let alone demonstrate leadership capability. 2 years is already generous. 1 year, my father countered, and he comes in as co-CEO, not COO. 18 months as executive vice president, I offered, with clearly defined performance metrics that must be met before any conversation about shared leadership can occur. My father studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. You've always been stubborn, Emma. Even as a little girl, you never backed down once you made up your mind about something. I prefer to call it principled, I replied with a small smile. He almost smiled back before catching himself. And these performance metrics, I suppose you'll be the one defining them? We can establish them together, I said. Objective measures that any business leader would agree are reasonable indicators of competence and commitment. Gregory cleared his throat, If I may suggest, I could help draft a framework for these metrics to ensure they're fair and comprehensive. My father leaned back in his chair, considering. And if Mark meets these metrics, what then? Then we discuss the next steps, I said carefully. I'm not promising to step aside, but I'm willing to consider a more collaborative leadership structure if he proves himself capable. And if he doesn't meet your metrics? My father pressed. Then he remains in a senior role suitable to his demonstrated abilities, but I retain primary leadership of the company, I stated firmly. This isn't about pushing Mark out, Dad. It's about ensuring Wilson Family Pharmacy continues to thrive. My father was silent for a long moment, weighing his options. I could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. The recognition that I held a strong legal position, balanced against his desire to see his son in charge. I'll need to discuss this with Mark, he said finally. Of course, I agreed. But I think we both know this is the most reasonable solution. It gives Mark the opportunity you want him to have while protecting the company I've spent 8 years building. Gregory nodded. I can have an agreement drawn up by tomorrow, outlining the terms of this arrangement, the time frame, position, performance metrics, and process for evaluating leadership succession. My father stood abruptly. I'll let you know our decision by tomorrow afternoon. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Emma, regardless of how this turns out, I want you to know that I am proud of what you've accomplished with the company. I may not always show it, but I am. Before I could respond, he was gone, leaving me staring after him in surprise. In all my years of working for Wilson Family Pharmacy, through all the successes and achievements, I could count on one hand the number of times my father had explicitly expressed pride in my work. Gregory gave me a small smile. That's progress, at least. Maybe, I replied, not entirely convinced. Or maybe it's just another tactic. The lawyer shrugged. Either way, you've established a reasonable middle ground. If they reject it, they'll appear unreasonable even to themselves. I nodded, gathering my materials. Thank you for your help with this, Gregory. I appreciate your guidance. I've known your family for a long time, Emma, he replied, walking me to the door. Your grandfather would be proud of how you're handling this, standing your ground while still trying to find a solution that works for everyone. As I drove back to my apartment, I felt strangely light, as if a weight had been lifted. The, situation wasn't resolved, not by a long shot, but for the first time since that fateful Sunday dinner, I felt like I had regained some control over my future. My phone rang as I was parking, Olivia calling about our drinks plans. Hey, I answered. Still on for 7? Absolutely, she replied. How did the meeting go? Better than expected, actually. I offered a compromise. Mark gets 18 months to prove himself in a senior role before we discuss succession again. And your dad agreed to that? Not yet. He's going to talk to Mark first, but I think he'll come around. He doesn't have many other options. There was a pause on the other end of the line. And are you okay with that? With Mark potentially taking over eventually? I sighed, staring up at my apartment building. I don't think it will come to that. Mark's never stuck with anything difficult for more than a few months. I'm betting he'll get bored or frustrated long before the 18 months are up. And if he doesn't? If he actually rises to the challenge? It was a question I had been avoiding, even in my own thoughts. Then I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. But at least it will be my choice, not something forced on me without my consent. As I hung up and headed into my building, I couldn't shake the feeling that this apparent resolution was too neat, too easy. My father had backed down too quickly, accepted the concept of compromise too readily. It didn't fit his character, and that made me uneasy. Because if there was one thing I had learned in my years of dealing with my father, it was that Robert Wilson never conceded defeat. He merely changed tactics. What I didn't know then was that my father's next move would change everything, throwing Our carefully negotiated compromise into chaos and forcing me to make choices I never thought I'd face. 2 days passed with no word from my father or Mark. I maintained my normal routine at work, reviewing quarterly projections with the finance team, meeting with our pharmaceutical suppliers about upcoming contract renewals, and checking in with managers at our various locations. To anyone watching, it would appear as though nothing had changed, but the silence from my family hung over me like a storm cloud, making it difficult to focus on anything else. Olivia had listened patiently, over drinks as I'd recounted my meeting with my father, offering both support and practical advice. "Don't call them," she'd said firmly. "Let them come to you. You've made a reasonable offer. The ball is in their court now." I knew she was right, but the waiting was excruciating. Every time my phone rang, I felt my heart rate accelerate, only to be disappointed when it was just a vendor or colleague. By the third morning, I was beginning to wonder if my father had decided to pursue some other strategy entirely. That afternoon, as I was reviewing plans for the new Grand Rapids location, Grace appeared in my doorway with an unusually grave expression. "Your mother is here to see you." I blinked in surprise. My mother rarely came to the office, preferring to keep her involvement in the business limited to attending corporate events and managing the family's social connections. "Send her in." Diane Wilson entered with the perfect posture and polished appearance that had been her trademark for as long as I could remember. At 62, she still dressed impeccably, today in a navy pantsuit that likely cost more than most people's monthly rent. Despite our strained relationship, I had always admired her composure and dignity. "Emma," she greeted me, accepting the seat I offered with a graceful nod. "Thank you for seeing me without an appointment." "Of course. Mom, is everything all right?" I studied her face, trying to discern her purpose in coming here. My mother was not given to spontaneous visits, particularly in the middle of a family conflict. She folded her hands in her lap, a gesture I recognized as her way of centering herself before difficult conversations. "Your father had a heart attack last night." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What? Is he?" "He's stable," she quickly assured me. "They performed an angioplasty this morning. The doctors say he was fortunate. The damage was minimal. And they caught it early." I sank back in my chair, relief washing over me. "Why didn't you call me?" "I would have come to the hospital immediately." Something flickered across her face, discomfort perhaps, or guilt. It all happened very quickly, and given the tension between you and your father recently, I wasn't sure. She left the sentence unfinished, but her meaning was clear enough. She hadn't been sure if I would care or if my presence would only upset my father further. The implication stung. "He's my father, Mom. Of course I would want to know." I kept my voice even with effort. "Which hospital is he in?" "Lakeside Memorial. He'll be there for at least 2 more days for observation." She hesitated. "Emma, there's something else we need to discuss." I braced myself. "Go on." "The doctors say this was a warning sign. Your father needs to reduce his stress levels immediately. No work, no business concerns, nothing that might trigger another episode." I nodded. "Of course. He should take all the time he needs to recover." "It's more than just time," my mother continued. "Robert needs to fully retire. The doctors were quite clear about this. His heart can't handle the stress of continued involvement in the business, even at a distance." I frowned slightly, not entirely following where this was heading. "I understand, and I agree. Dad's health has to come first. The thing is," my mother paused, seeming to choose her words carefully, "this changes our situation. With your father unable to continue even in an advisory capacity, the transition has become more urgent. Mark will need to step into a leadership role sooner rather than later." And there it was. I should have known my mother's visit wasn't purely to inform me about my father's health. There was always an agenda with Diane Wilson, always a calculated purpose behind her actions. "Mom," I said slowly, "Dad's health emergency doesn't change the legal reality of our situation. I still hold 30% of the company. The shareholder agreement still requires 75% approval for leadership changes." Her lips thinned slightly. "Emma, your father just had a heart attack. Surely you can set aside business concerns for the sake of his health?" The implied accusation made my blood simmer. "I'm not the one who brought up business concerns, Mom. You are. I'm genuinely worried about Dad and want him to recover fully. That doesn't mean I'm suddenly going to hand over the company to Mark without the proper process we've already discussed." My mother's carefully maintained composure slipped, just for a moment. "This isn't just about the business anymore. It's about your father's life. The doctors say he needs to eliminate stress, and knowing that the succession plan he wanted is in place would give him peace of mind." I stood and walked to the window, needing a moment to gather my thoughts. The lakefront stretched out below, waves lapping gently at the shore despite the turmoil in my office. I turned back to face my mother. "I want to see him," I said firmly. "Today? And I want to speak with his doctors myself." Something like alarm flashed in my mother's eyes. "That's not necessary. I've told you what they said." "It is necessary," I cut her off. "If Dad's condition is as serious as you say, then I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. As CEO of this company and as his daughter." My mother's jaw tightened, but she nodded reluctantly. "Fine. Visiting hours end at 8 p.m. "I'll be there at 5, I replied. "And Mom, next time my father has a medical emergency, call me immediately. No matter what else is going on between us, I deserve to know." She stood, smoothing her already perfect pantsuit. "Of course, I apologize for the oversight." As she turned to leave, a thought struck me. "Does Mark know? About Dad's heart attack?" "Yes," she replied without turning around. "He was at the hospital all night." The door closed behind her, leaving me alone with a whirlwind of emotions. Concern for my father battled with suspicion about the convenient timing of this health crisis. It was a horrible thought, one that made me ashamed even as it formed in my mind. But I couldn't shake the feeling that my mother wasn't telling me the whole story. I called Grace in. "Cancel my meetings for the rest of the day. My father is in the hospital. Heart attack." Her eyes widened. "Oh my God, Emma, I'm so sorry. Is he going to be okay?" "They say he's stable," I replied, already gathering my things. "But I need to see for myself. And Grace? Could you call Gregory Bennett for me? Ask him to meet me at Lakeside Memorial Hospital at 4:30 if he's available." She nodded, though her expression was puzzled. "Of course. But why the lawyer?" "Just a precaution," I said vaguely. "I'll explain later." As I drove to the hospital, my mind raced. I had no doubt that my father had actually suffered a heart attack. My mother wouldn't lie about something that serious. But the timing was suspiciously convenient, coming right as we'd reached an impasse in our negotiations about the company's future. And my mother's insistence that a swift transition to Mark's leadership was necessary for my father's recovery? That felt calculated, an attempt to use his medical condition as leverage to achieve what they'd wanted all along. I parked in the hospital's visitor lot and made my way to the main entrance, spotting Gregory already waiting in the lobby. The older lawyer was dressed in his usual impeccable suit, though his expression was somber. "Emma," he greeted me with a gentle handshake. "I was sorry to hear about your father. How is he doing?" "Stable, according to my mother," I replied, "but I haven't seen him yet." Gregory nodded. "May I ask why you wanted me to meet you here? I'm happy to provide support, of course, but this seems more like a family matter than a legal one." I lowered my voice. "My mother visited me earlier today to inform me about Dad's heart attack. She also suggested that for the sake of his health, I should agree to Mark taking over the company immediately, without the transition period we discussed." The lawyer's eyebrows rose. Ah, and you're concerned this might be an attempt to circumvent the legal considerations we've established? I don't want to believe that, I admitted. But I also know my family. They've made it very clear what outcome they want, and they're not above using emotional leverage to get it. Gregory considered this, stroking his chin thoughtfully. It's a delicate situation. On one hand, your father's health must be the priority. On the other, major business decisions shouldn't be made under duress or emotional manipulation. Exactly. I want you with me when I speak to his doctors, so we both have a clear understanding of his actual medical needs versus what might be embellished for strategic purposes. The lawyer frowned slightly. Are you suggesting your mother might have exaggerated your father's condition? No, I said quickly. I believe Dad had a heart attack, but I do think the connection between his recovery and Mark taking over the company immediately might be overstated. We took the elevator to the cardiac care unit on the 4th floor. As we approached the nurse's station, I spotted Mark emerging from a room halfway down the hall. He froze when he saw me, his expression cycling rapidly from surprise to wariness. Emma, he said as I reached him, you finally decided to show up. I ignored the barb. How is he? Mark's face softened slightly. Better than he was last night. They say the procedure went well. He's resting now. I nodded, feeling a genuine wave of relief. Good. I'd like to see him. He's sleeping, Mark replied, positioning himself slightly in front of the door. Mom said not to disturb him. I won't wake him, I promised. I just need to see for myself that he's okay. My brother hesitated, then finally stepped aside with obvious reluctance. Fine, but who's this? He asked, eyeing Gregory suspiciously. This is Gregory Bennett, I replied. Our family lawyer. I'd like him to speak with Dad's doctors as well, to make sure we have a clear understanding of his condition and needs going forward. Mark's eyes narrowed. You brought a lawyer to Dad's hospital room? Seriously, Emma? I'm just being thorough, I replied evenly. Dad would expect nothing less from the CEO of his company. Before Mark could respond, the door to my father's room opened, and my mother emerged. She stopped short at the sight of me and Gregory. Emma, she greeted me with a stiff nod. And Mr. Bennett, I didn't expect to see you here. Gregory smiled diplomatically. I came to offer support to the Wilson family during this difficult time. How is Robert doing? Resting, my mother replied, her gaze flicking between the lawyer and me. The doctors say he needs absolute quiet. I understand, I said. But I'd still like to see him, even if he's sleeping. And I'd like to speak with his doctors, with Gregory present. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. I've already spoken with the medical team extensively. There's no need to bother them again. It's not a bother, Mrs. Wilson, came a new voice from behind us. A woman in a white coat approached, extending her hand. Dr. Patel, cardiology, you must be Emma. Your father has mentioned you often during our intake discussions. I shook her hand, feeling a small surge of validation that my father had at least acknowledged my existence to his doctors. Yes, I'm Emma Wilson. This is Gregory Bennett, our family lawyer. I was hoping to get an update on my father's condition, directly from you, if that's possible. Dr. Patel glanced at my mother, who gave a tight nod of permission. Of course. Why don't we step into the consultation room for some privacy? She led us, me, Gregory, Mark, and my mother, into a small conference room adjacent to the nurse's station. Once we were seated, Dr. Patel opened a tablet and pulled up my father's charts. Mr. Wilson experienced what we call a mild myocardial infarction, a heart attack, yesterday evening. We performed an angioplasty this morning to clear the blockage in his right coronary artery and placed a stent to keep the artery open. The procedure was successful, and the damage to his heart muscle appears minimal. Relief washed over me. That's good news. Dr. Patel nodded. It is. However, this event is still a serious warning sign. Your father has elevated blood pressure, high cholesterol, and his stress test results indicate he's been under significant strain. We'll be adjusting his medications, but lifestyle changes will be essential to prevent a more serious cardiac event in the future. What kind of lifestyle changes? Gregory asked. A heart-healthy diet, moderate exercise once he's recovered, and most importantly, stress reduction, the doctor replied. I understand Mr. Wilson is involved in a family business. He's the founder and majority owner, my mother interjected quickly, though he's been planning to retire. Dr. Patel nodded. Retirement would be advisable, yes. Complete disengagement from work-related stress for at least 6 months, and then only minimal involvement after that, depending on his recovery progress. And what constitutes work-related stress? I asked carefully. Are there specific activities he should avoid? Anything that raises his blood pressure, Dr. Patel explained. Decision-making responsibilities, contentious business meetings, financial concerns. These can all trigger stress responses that would be dangerous in his condition. I nodded thoughtfully. So if there were unresolved business matters causing him worry, it would be better to resolve those quickly and completely, rather than leaving them open-ended. Generally speaking, yes, the doctor agreed. Closure on stressful matters would be beneficial, provided the process of reaching that closure doesn't itself create additional strain. I caught the slight narrowing of my mother's eyes as she realized where I was going with this line of questioning. One last question, Dr. Patel, I said. In your professional opinion, would it be more stressful for my father to know that his company is in experienced, capable hands that have successfully guided it for the past 8 years, or to worry about it being transferred to someone with no experience in the industry? Mark stiffened beside me. Dr. Patel glanced between us, clearly sensing the undercurrents of family tension. I can't speak to the specific business dynamics at play here, she replied diplomatically. But generally, patients recover better when they have confidence in the stability of their affairs. Uncertainty tends to increase stress levels. Thank you, doctor, Gregory said smoothly, standing to shake her hand. This has been very informative. Would it be possible for me to get a copy of Mr. Wilson's care instructions and recommendations? The family wants to ensure they're following medical advice precisely. Of course, I'll have the nurse print those for you. After Dr. Patel left, a heavy silence fell over the consultation room. My mother was the first to break it. I hope you're satisfied, Emma, she said coldly. Questioning the doctor like this was completely unnecessary. On the contrary, I replied, it was very necessary. Now we all have the same information, directly from the source. Mark leaned forward, his voice low and angry. You just couldn't help yourself, could you? Even here, even now, you had to make it about the business, about proving you're better qualified than me. That's not what this was about, I countered. Mom came to my office specifically to use Dad's condition as leverage in our ongoing discussion about the company's leadership. I needed to understand exactly what his medical needs actually are, not what you're claiming they are to get your way. How dare you? My mother hissed. Your father is lying in a hospital bed, and you're still thinking about maintaining your control over the company? I met her gaze steadily. No, I'm thinking about what's best for Dad's health and for the business he spent his life building. And based on what the doctor just told us, the last thing he needs is to worry about the company being handed over to someone with no experience or demonstrated commitment. Mark stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. I've had enough of this. I'm going to check on Dad. After he left, my mother fixed me with a cold stare. You've changed, Emma. You used to care about this family. I still do, I replied quietly. But I also care about the truth. And the truth is, Dad's recovery doesn't depend on Mark taking over the company. It depends on Dad knowing the business is in good hands, which it already is. Gregory, who had been silent throughout this exchange, cleared his throat gently. Perhaps this isn't the best time or place to resolve these matters. Robert's immediate recovery should be the priority for everyone. My mother nodded stiffly. For once, we agree on something. She stood, gathering her purse. I'm going back to sit with my husband. I assume you still want to see him? Of course, I replied, rising as well. If he's awake, I'd like a few minutes alone with him. She hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. 5 minutes. He needs his rest. After she left, Gregory turned to me with a concerned expression. Emma, tread carefully here. Family conflicts have a way of escalating beyond anyone's intentions, especially when health issues are involved. I know, I sighed, suddenly feeling the weight of the past few days. But they started this, Gregory. They were ready to push me out without a second thought, and now they're trying to use Dad's heart attack to get their way. Perhaps, he acknowledged, but consider this from their perspective as well. Your father is facing his own mortality, for perhaps the first time. It's natural for him to think about his legacy, about the continuity of what he's built. I nodded, absorbing his point. I understand that. But why does that continuity have to come through Mark? Why not through me? Traditional thinking, Gregory replied with a small shrug. Right or wrong, it's deeply ingrained in many men of your father's generation. The son carries on the family name, the family business, the family legacy. Even if the son has shown no interest or aptitude for it, even if the daughter has proven herself time and again, even then, he confirmed. It's not rational, Emma. It's emotional. And emotions are running very high right now. I took a deep breath, centering myself. You're right. I'll keep that in mind when I speak with Dad. Gregory patted my shoulder, gently. I'll wait in the lobby. Take your time. I made my way to my father's room, pausing outside the door to collect myself. Through the small window, I could see him lying in the hospital bed, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I had ever seen him. The sight sent a pang through my chest, a reminder that regardless of our business disagreements, this was my father, the man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had cheered at my college graduation, who had, in his own flawed way, tried to prepare me for the world. I knocked softly and entered. My father's eyes were open, though they looked tired and slightly unfocused, the effect of medications most likely. Mark sat in a chair beside the bed, while my mother stood at the window, her back to the room. Emma, my father said, his voice weaker than usual, but still carrying that note of authority that had defined him my entire life. You came. Of course I came, I replied, moving to the opposite side of the bed from Mark. How are you feeling? Like I had a heart attack, he answered dryly, a ghost of his usual humor surfacing briefly. Your mother tells me you brought Gregory with you. I nodded, choosing my words carefully. I wanted his guidance on how best to handle company matters while you're recovering. The last thing you need is to worry about business right now. My father's eyes, still sharp despite his condition, studied my face. And what did you conclude? That the business is stable and in good hands, I said simply. That there's no need for any dramatic changes that might cause you additional stress. Mark made a sound of disgust. Unbelievable. You're really going to do this now? I ignored him, keeping my focus on my father. Dad, I want you to recover fully. That's the most important thing right now. The company is doing well, better than ever, in fact. There's no reason to make hasty decisions about its future while you're in this condition. My father's gaze shifted between Mark and me, his expression unreadable. Your mother said you met with Dr. Patel. I did. She says your prognosis is good, but you need to reduce stress significantly. No work, no business concerns for Addie. Least 6 months. He nodded slowly. And you think keeping things as they are is the best way to accomplish that? I do, I replied firmly. The company is thriving under my leadership. You know that, Dad. The numbers don't lie. Bringing Mark in with no experience, no knowledge of the industry, that's a recipe for problems that would ultimately cause you more stress, not less. My mother turned from the window, her voice tight with anger. That's enough, Emma. Your father doesn't need this right now. No, Diane, my father interjected, raising a hand weakly. Let her speak. I want to hear what she has to say. I took a deep breath. The compromise I proposed before is still on the table. Mark can join the company, learn the business from the ground up. If he proves himself capable, we can discuss a more significant role for him down the road. But for now, the best thing for both you and the company is stability and continuity. Mark stood, his face flushed with anger. This is ridiculous. Dad, she's using your condition to keep control of the company. Can't you see that? Actually, I countered, that's exactly what you and Mom were trying to do. She came to my office specifically to use your heart attack as leverage to force an immediate transition to Mark's leadership. My father's eyes widened slightly, turning to my mother. Diane? She had the grace to look momentarily abashed, before rallying. I merely pointed out that knowing the succession plan was in place would give you peace of mind during your recovery. Which is true. What would give me peace of mind, my father said slowly, is knowing my family isn't tearing itself apart over the business while I'm lying in a hospital bed. Us? The rebuke landed heavily on all of us. For a moment, no one spoke, the only sound in the room the steady beep of the heart monitor. You're right, Dad, I said finally. This isn't helping your recovery. We should table this discussion until you're feeling better. To my surprise, Mark nodded in agreement. Emma's right. Your health comes first. My father looked between us, a glimmer of his old authority returning to his eyes despite his weakened state. I want you both to listen carefully, he said. This company has been my life's work. I built it from nothing, sacrificed for it, poured everything I had into it. I've always wanted it to remain in the family, to be a legacy that outlasts me. He paused, gathering strength. But not at the cost of this family itself. Whatever happens with Wilson Family Pharmacy, you two are still brother and sister. That matters more than any business. The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. This wasn't the calculating businessman I'd been battling for the past week. This was my father, facing his own mortality and concerned about the family he might leave behind. We understand, Dad, Mark said, his own voice softer than I'd heard it in years. Do you? My father pressed. Because from where I'm lying, it seems like you're both willing to sacrifice your relationship with each other over who gets my chair. The truth of his words stung. Had I been so focused on maintaining control of the company that I'd lost sight of what really mattered? Had my determination to be recognized for my contributions blinded me to the damage this fight was doing? To our family? I don't want to fight with Mark, I said quietly. I just want to be respected for what I've built, for what I've contributed to this company. My father's expression softened. I know, Emma. And you deserve that respect. You've done remarkable things with the business, taken it further than I ever could have. He turned to Mark. And you need to recognize that. Your sister has earned her position through years of hard work and proven results. Mark looked down, a flicker of something like shame crossing his face. I know she has, Dad. But Emma, my father continued, turning. Back to me. Mark is your brother. He deserves a chance too. Not handed to him, not given out of nepotism, but a genuine opportunity to prove himself, to find his place in this family's legacy. I nodded slowly, seeing the wisdom in his words. That's all I've been asking for, a fair process, based on merit and demonstrated capability. My father closed his eyes briefly, fatigue evident in his face. Then that's what we'll do. But not today. Today, I need to rest. And you two need to remember that you're family first. Business associates second. It was a clear dismissal, and we all recognized it. My mother moved to adjust his pillows, her expression softening with concern. We should let you sleep now, Robert. He nodded, his eyes already drifting closed. Emma, he murmured. Stay? A moment, just you. Mark and my mother exchanged glances but left without protest. When the door closed behind them, my father opened his eyes again, fixing me with a steady gaze that belied his weakened condition. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. The words were so unexpected that for a moment I couldn't respond. Robert, Wilson didn't apologize. Not to employees, not to business rivals, and certainly not to his children. For what? I finally managed. For not seeing what was right in front of me all these years, he replied. For not acknowledging what you've accomplished with the company. For holding on to outdated ideas about who should lead and why. I swallowed hard against the sudden tightness in my throat. Thank you for saying that, Dad. He reached for my hand, his grip weaker than I remembered, but still firm. This heart attack. It makes you think about things differently. About what matters. About mistakes you've made. You don't need to... I do, he interrupted. I do need to say this. You were right about the business, Emma. You saved it when I was too stubborn to see it was failing. You transformed it into something far beyond what I had built. I should have recognized that long ago. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. After 8 years of fighting for recognition, of struggling to be seen as more than just the daughter, my father was finally acknowledging my contributions. That means a lot to me, I said softly. He nodded, his eyes drifting closed again. I still want Mark to have a place in the company. He's my son, your brother. But it has to be earned, not given. You've proven that's the right way. I agree, I replied, and I'm willing to help him, to teach him, if that's what he truly wants. My father squeezed my hand weakly. Good. Because whatever happens with me, the future of Wilson Family Pharmacy rests with you two now. And I'd rather leave knowing you're working together than at odds. The monitor beside his bed beeped, his heart rate elevating slightly. Concerned, I stood. You should rest now, Dad. We can talk more when you're stronger. He nodded, already drifting toward sleep. Remember what I said, Emma? The business matters, but family matters more. As I quietly left the room, those words echoed in my mind. Family matters more. It was a sentiment I had always believed in theory, but in practice, our family dynamics had often been shaped more by competition than cooperation, by hierarchy than mutual respect. Outside in the hallway, I found Mark leaning against the wall, arms crossed, expression guarded. What did he say to you? He asked. I hesitated, unsure how much to share of that private moment with our father. He apologized, I said finally, for not recognizing my contributions to the company sooner. Mark's eyebrows rose in surprise. Dad apologized? To you? I was as shocked as you are, I admitted with a small smile. My brother shook his head. In disbelief. This heart attack really has changed him. Maybe it's changed all of us, I suggested. Or at least, maybe it should. Mark studied me for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Look, Emma, I know I haven't been fair to you. I know I've never acknowledged how much you've done for the company. No, I agreed. You haven't. Dad's right. You earned your position. You built that business into what it is today. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I recognized from our childhood. The truth is, I was jealous. You were always the smart one, the capable one, the responsible one. I was just the son. The admission hung between us, more honest than any conversation we'd had in years. Being the son came with its own advantages, I pointed out, ones I never had access to. I know, he acknowledged, and I took them for granted. I assumed leadership of the company would eventually be handed to me, just because that's how things have always worked in this family. And now? Mark sighed heavily. Now I don't know. I still want a place in the company. It's our family's legacy after all. But maybe not like this. Not at the cost of tearing the family apart. Not at the cost of Dad's health. I nodded, feeling a cautious hope rise within me. The offer I made before still stands. Join the company, learn the business from the ground up. Prove yourself based on merit, not birthright. And if I do? He asked. If I actually turn out to be good at this? Then we'll figure out the next steps together, I replied. As a family. Mark extended his hand. Deal. As we shook on it, I couldn't help but wonder if this moment of clarity would last beyond the hospital walls, beyond the immediate shock of our father's heart attack. Family dynamics rarely change overnight, and old patterns have a way of reasserting themselves when the crisis has passed. But for now, standing in that hospital hallway with my brother, I allowed myself to hope that perhaps something good might come from this frightening ordeal, a new understanding, a path forward based on mutual respect rather than outdated traditions and resentment. What I couldn't have known then was that this fragile peace would be tested sooner than any of us expected, as revelations about the company's finances and my father's secret dealings came to light, forcing me to make the most difficult decision of my professional life. My father came home from the hospital 3 days later, considerably weakened but stubbornly determined to recover on his own terms. He insisted on returning to the lakefront house rather than staying with either Mark or me, claiming he would heal faster in familiar surroundings. My mother, ever vigilant, transformed their home into a miniature medical ward, with a hospital bed in the den, a carefully planned schedule of medications, and a rotation of home health aides that she supervised with military precision. The tentative peace Mark and I had reached in the hospital corridor seemed to be holding. He had shown up at the office the day after our conversation, dressed more professionally than I'd ever seen him and carrying a notebook. I'm ready to learn, he'd announced, with a humility that seemed genuine, if slightly forced. I'd assigned him to shadow our operations manager, starting with the basics of inventory management and regulatory compliance, the unglamorous but essential foundation of our business. For 2 weeks, a strange new normal took shape. I led the company as I always had. Mark diligently worked his way through each department, and our father focused on recovery, accepting twice-daily updates from both of us with surprising equanimity. It wasn't perfect. There were moments of tension, flashes of the old resentments, but it was progress. Then came the letter. I was reviewing quarterly projections for our specialty compounding service when Grace knocked on my office door, her expression troubled. Emma, this just arrived? By courier. It's marked urgent and confidential. The envelope she handed me bore the letterhead of Midwest Health Partners, the largest insurance provider in our region and one of our most important business relationships. My stomach tightened as I opened it, a premonition of trouble that proved immediately justified. The letter was brief but devastating. Midwest Health was terminating our contract, effective in 90 days. No explanation was provided beyond a vague reference to failure to meet contractual obligations, but the implications were enormous. MHP represented nearly 40% of our prescription volume across all locations. Losing them would be catastrophic. Get me James Hunter on the phone, I told Grace, referring to our main contact at MHP, and pull all our contract documentation with them from the past 5 years. While waiting for the call, I scanned our most recent performance metrics with MHP. Everything looked normal. We were meeting all service-level agreements. Our claim rejection rate was well below industry average, and patient satisfaction scores were excellent. There was nothing that would justify such an abrupt termination. After 20 minutes of increasingly frustrated attempts, Grace returned with troubling news. Mr. Hunter is no longer with the company, according to his assistant. She wouldn't tell me who's handling our account now or connect me with anyone in authority. I frowned. James had been our contact at MHP for years, a relationship I'd carefully cultivated. His sudden departure and the secretive response from his office suggested something more complex than a routine business decision. "Keep trying," I instructed. "Go up the chain if necessary. I need to speak with someone who can explain this." For the next 2 hours, I dove into our contract documentation, looking for any clause or condition we might have violated. Finding nothing, I widened my search to industry news, wondering if MHP was making broader changes to their pharmacy network. Again, nothing raised red flags. By late afternoon, with still no response from MHP, I decided to take a more direct approach. "Grace, call my car service. I'm going to their corporate office." She looked alarmed. "Without an appointment? Emma, they probably won't see you." "They'll see me," I replied, gathering my materials into a portfolio. "Make sure Mark knows where I've gone. He's due back from the distribution center tour at 4:30. The headquarters of Midwest Health Partners occupied a gleaming glass tower in downtown Lakeside, its lobby a sterile expanse of marble and minimalist furniture. I approached the reception desk with confident purpose, presenting my business card to the young man stationed there. "Emma Wilson, CEO of Wilson Family Pharmacy. I need to speak with whoever has replaced James Hunter as our account manager. It's regarding the contract termination notice we received today." He glanced at my card, then at his computer screen. "I don't see an appointment, Ms. Wilson." "It's an urgent matter that requires immediate attention," I replied firmly. "Please, let them know I'm here and that I won't be leaving until I've spoken with someone in authority." The receptionist looked uncertain, but made the call. After a brief, hushed conversation, he directed me to take a seat in the waiting area. I remained, standing, unwilling to signal even that small surrender of position. 10 minutes later, a professionally dressed woman emerged from the elevator bank. "Ms. Wilson, I'm Vanessa Sharma, Vice President of Provider Relations. I understand you have some questions about your contract status." "I have more than questions," I replied. "I have significant concerns about the unexplained termination of a long-standing business relationship that has been beneficial to both our organizations." She nodded, her expression carefully neutral. "Let's discuss this in my office, shall we?" As we rode the elevator to the 18th floor, I studied her sidelong. Vanessa Sharma was new to me. I prided myself on knowing every key player at our partner organizations, and her name had never come up in any MHP interactions. Her office was corner-positioned with expansive views of Lake Michigan, the decor tastefully impersonal. She gestured for me to take a seat as she settled behind her desk. "Ms. Wilson, I appreciate your dedication to resolving this matter, but I must inform you that the decision to terminate Wilson Family Pharmacy's contract has been finalized at the executive level. The 90-day notice period exceeds our contractual obligation, which is actually only 60 days. "What I'm looking for is the reason behind this decision," I replied, maintaining eye contact. "Our performance metrics exceed industry standards across all parameters. We've been a reliable partner to MHP for over 20 years. There's been no explanation for this sudden change." Vanessa's expression remained impassive. "Business decisions of this nature are complex and based on multiple factors. I'm afraid I can't discuss the specifics." "Can't or won't?" I pressed. A flicker of something, discomfort, perhaps, crossed her face before her professional mask reasserted itself. "Ms. Wilson, I understand this is difficult news, but Let me be direct, I interrupted. Has someone from my family contacted MHP regarding our business relationship? Her slight hesitation told me everything I needed to know. I see, I said quietly. When did this contact occur? I'm not at liberty to discuss. Was it my father or my brother? Vanessa straightened in her chair. Ms. Wilson, regardless of how this decision came about, it is final. Midwest Health Partners will be contracting with Henderson Pharmacy Group to service our members after the transition period. The mention of Henderson sent a jolt through me. Henderson Pharmacy Group was our largest local competitor, a regional chain that had been trying to edge us out of the market for years. They were also owned by longtime friends of my father, the same Hendersons whose children had inherited equal shares in their parents' restaurant business, as I'd pointedly reminded Mark at the hospital. Thank you for your time, Ms. Sharma, I said, rising abruptly. I believe I understand the situation now. As I rode the elevator down, my mind raced with implications. Someone in my family had deliberately undermined our relationship with our largest insurance partner, potentially crippling Wilson Family Pharmacy. The timing, just as we seemed to be reaching a tentative peace, couldn't be coincidental. Bitao. The time I reached my car, my initial shock had hardened into cold anger. I pulled out my phone and called the one person who might have insight into what was happening. Gregory, it's Emma. I need to see you immediately. It's about the company, and I think my family is trying to sabotage it. The lawyer agreed to meet me at his office within the hour. As I drove there, I received a text from Mark. Where are you? Grace said something about MHP. What's going on? I didn't respond. At this point, I didn't know who I could trust, even with our recent tentative truce. Gregory was waiting in his office when I arrived, concern evident in his lined face. Emma, what's happened? I explained the situation rapidly, the unexpected contract termination, the stonewalling from MHP, the revelation that Henderson Pharmacy Group would be taking over their business. And you believe someone in your family orchestrated this? He asked, his expression grave. It's too coincidental, I replied. MHP has been our partner for decades. Their sudden decision to drop us right in the middle of our succession dispute and transfer their business to a company owned by my father's friends? Someone is trying to devalue Wilson Family Pharmacy to make it appear I'm losing control. Gregory stroked his chin thoughtfully. It would be a drastic move. The company would lose substantial revenue. Exactly. Whoever did this is willing to damage the business to force me out. I paced the office, unable to contain my agitation. I need to know who at MHP made this decision and who from my family contacted them. I can make some inquiries through back channels, Gregory offered. I have connections at MHP's legal department who might be more forthcoming than their PR team. Do it, I said firmly. And Gregory, I need something else. Full access to all company financial records for the past 10 years. Not just the top-level reports I normally see, but everything. Banking records, tax filings, loan applications, insurance policies. If someone's trying to undermine the company, I need to know what other surprises might be waiting. The lawyer hesitated. That level of detail has always been handled directly by your father, with his personal accountant. I'm not sure. I'm the CEO, Gregory, and a 30% shareholder. I have the right to review all company records. My tone left no room for argument. He nodded slowly. I'll send a formal request to Robert's accountant tomorrow morning. But Emma, tread carefully. If your suspicions are correct, this situation could escalate quickly. It already has, I replied grimly. Someone just declared war on me, and they're using the company as their battlefield. By the time I arrived home that evening, I had 17 missed calls, 5 from Mark, 3 from my mother, and the rest from various members of my executive team, all undoubtedly concerned about the MHP situation. I ignored them all, needing time to think, to plan my next move. My apartment, usually a sanctuary, felt suddenly vulnerable. If my family was willing to sabotage a critical business relationship, what else might they do? I double-checked the locks, then poured myself a generous glass of wine and carried it to the window overlooking the lake. The water stretched out before me, dark and restless under the night sky, mirroring my turbulent thoughts. Who had contacted MHP? My father, from his sickbed? Mark, despite our apparent reconciliation? My mother, always the quiet but effective, force behind my father's decisions? My phone buzzed again, Olivia this time. I answered, needing a perspective from outside the family drama. "Emma, what the hell is happening?" she demanded without preamble. "I just heard from Jacob at Henderson that they landed the MHP contract. Isn't that your biggest insurance partner?" Jacob Henderson, Olivia's cousin and the youngest son of Henderson Pharmacy's founders. Of course she would have insider information. "It is," I confirmed. "Or was, until they terminated our contract today without explanation." Without explanation? That makes no sense. You guys have had that relationship forever. I took a deep breath. "Olivia, I need you to ask Jacob something, discreetly. I need to know who from my family contacted MHP or Henderson about this deal." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "You think your own family sabotaged your contract?" "Emma, that would be incredibly destructive. The company will lose millions." "I know. Which is why I need to find out who's behind it, and why." "I'll see what I can get from Jacob," she promised. "But be careful, Emma, if someone's willing to go this far." "I know," I repeated, staring out at the darkness beyond my window. "Believe me, I know." The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual, prepared for the onslaught of questions that awaited me. My executive team was already gathered in the conference room, faces tight with concern. "I assume you've all heard about the MHP situation," I began without preamble. "Yes, they've terminated our contract effective in 90 days. Yes, they're moving their business to Henderson. No, they haven't provided a substantive explanation." "But why?" Thomas asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. "Our metrics with them are stellar." "That's what I intend to find out," I replied. "In the meantime, we need to mitigate the damage. Pauline, I need a complete financial impact assessment. Worst-case scenario if we can't replace the MHP business elsewhere." Our CFO nodded grimly. "I've already started running the numbers. Preliminary estimate is a 28-32% drop in total revenue across all locations. Some stores will be hit harder than others based on local insurance demographics." The room grew quiet, as the implications sank in. A revenue drop of that magnitude would mean layoffs, possibly even store closures. "We're not accepting this as a done deal," I said firmly. "I'm personally reaching out to every executive at MHP that I have a relationship with. In parallel, we need to accelerate our outreach to other insurance carriers, United, Blue Cross, Centene. If MHP won't reconsider, we need to replace as much of that business as possible." The team nodded, professional determination replacing shock as we outlined a response strategy. I assigned responsibilities, set reporting timelines, and emphasized the need for absolute discretion about our internal concerns. "This company has faced challenges before," I reminded them as the meeting concluded. "We'll weather this one too." As the team filed out, Grace approached with a concerned expression. "Mark has been calling nonstop since yesterday. He's on his way in now, demanding to speak with you." I nodded, steeling myself. "Send him in when he arrives." 10 minutes later, Mark burst into my office, his face flushed with a combination of anger and what looked almost like fear. "What the hell is going on with MHP? Why didn't you call me?" "Back?" I studied him carefully, searching for any sign of guilt or duplicity. "I was busy dealing with the fallout of our largest insurance partner suddenly terminating our contract without explanation." "Tell me, Mark, does that strike you as odd timing?" He frowned. What are you implying? I'm not implying anything. I'm asking directly, did you or Dad contact MHP about transferring their business to Henderson? Mark's expression shifted from defensive to genuinely shocked. What? No. Why would we do that? It would cripple the company. Exactly, I replied, still watching him closely. It would significantly devalue Wilson Family Pharmacy, make it seem as though my leadership was failing, perhaps create a situation where the board might consider a change in management. Understanding dawned on his face. You think we're trying to sabotage the company to force you out? Emma, that's insane. I want a place in this business, not to destroy it. His reaction seemed authentic, but I'd been fooled by my brother's apparent sincerity before. Someone contacted MHP, someone with enough influence to convince them to end a 20-year relationship that was beneficial to both sides. Mark sank into the chair across from my desk, running a hand through his hair. It wasn't me, Emma. I swear. And Dad. He's been focused entirely on his recovery. He barely has the energy to discuss business at all, let alone orchestrate something like this. What about Mom? He scoffed. Mom? She's never involved herself in the business operations. She wouldn't even know who to contact at MHP. I wasn't so sure about that. Diane Wilson had always been more aware of my father's business dealings than she let on. But Mark's point about our father's weakened condition rang true. Robert Wilson was many things, but he had never been the type to deliberately damage his own company, regardless of personal conflicts. Then who? I asked, more to myself than to Mark. Before he could respond, my phone rang. Gregory Bennett. I answered immediately, putting it on speaker so Mark could hear. Emma, I've just received some concerning information from my contact at MHP, the lawyer began. It appears the decision to terminate Wilson Family Pharmacy's contract came directly from their CEO, following a private meeting 2 weeks ago. A meeting with whom? I pressed. There was a pause before Gregory answered. With James Blackwell. Mark and I exchanged confused glances. Who is James Blackwell? Mark asked. That's what I asked, Gregory continued. According to my source, he's a representative of Ascendant Healthcare Capital, a private equity firm that apparently has been discussing a potential acquisition of Wilson Family Pharmacy. The room seemed to tilt around me. That's impossible. Wilson Family Pharmacy isn't for sale. There have been no acquisition discussions. Nevertheless, Mr. Blackwell presented himself as an authorized representative of the Wilson family's interests, with documentation suggesting preliminary acquisition talks were underway. He informed MHP that under new ownership, the pharmacy would be restructuring its insurance partnerships. Mark's face had gone pale. But that's fraud. Someone is impersonating our family in business negotiations? Not impersonating, I said slowly, pieces clicking into place. Representing. Gregory, I need you to find out everything you can about Ascendant Healthcare Capital, and about James Blackwell specifically. And I need those financial records I requested yesterday, immediately. After ending the call, I turned to Mark, whose expression had shifted from confusion to anger. Someone is trying to sell our company out from under us, he said incredulously. It appears so, I agreed. And they're sabotaging our key business relationships to drive down the value before the sale. But who would have the authority to even begin those conversations? It would have to be a family member, or someone with legal power to represent the family's interests. I nodded grimly. Exactly. And there aren't many people who fit that description. Mark's eyes widened as he followed my logic. You can't seriously think Dad is behind this? I don't know what to think, I admitted, but I intend to find out. The answers began to emerge that afternoon when Gregory's assistant delivered a thick folder of financial documents to my office. Mark had insisted on staying, his own stake in the company giving him legitimate interest in whatever we might discover. We spread the documents across the conference table, banking statements, tax filings, loan applications, and internal financial reports going back 10 years. At first glance, everything appeared in order, matching the summary reports I received regularly as CEO. But as we dug deeper, discrepancies began to emerge. Small at first. Expense accounts with vague descriptions, consulting fees to companies I'd never heard of, loan repayments for loans that weren't on our main books. "This doesn't make sense," Mark murmured, comparing two documents. "According to this tax filing, we took a $2 million loss on the West Side location 3 years ago, but the store performance reports show it was profitable that year." I looked over his shoulder, frowning. "And here, a series of payments to BSG Consulting, $50,000 per quarter for the past 5 years. We don't work with any consulting firm by that name." As we continued our investigation, a disturbing pattern emerged. For years, money had been flowing out of Wilson Family Pharmacy through various channels, always just below the threshold. That would trigger closer scrutiny from our regular auditors. The totals were staggering. Nearly $4 million over the past decade. "Dad has been siphoning money from the company," Mark said, his voice hollow with disbelief. "But why? We're profitable. He takes a generous salary and dividends." I shook my head, equally bewildered. "And where is the money going? These shell companies, these consultants, they must lead somewhere." The answer came from an unexpected source. As we sat surrounded by evidence of financial impropriety, my phone rang. Olivia. "Emma, I talked to Jacob," she said without preamble. "He says Henderson has no deal with MHP. They were approached about it, but negotiations fell through when they asked for proof that Wilson Family Pharmacy was actually being sold." "Wait, what?" I sat up straighter. "Henderson isn't taking over the MHP contract?" "No. According to Jacob, this whole thing was orchestrated by someone trying to create the appearance of business instability at Wilson. But when Henderson demanded documentation proving the sale was real, everything went quiet. MHP is now scrambling to figure out what's happening with their pharmacy coverage." I exchanged a glance with Mark, whose expression mirrored my own. Confusion. "Olivia, did Jacob mention the name Ascendant Healthcare Capital? Or James Blackwell?" "Blackwell, yes. Jacob said he was the one who approached Henderson, claiming to represent the new buyers of Wilson Family Pharmacy. They were suspicious from the start. It's a small industry, and no one had heard anything about your company being for sale." "And did Henderson verify Blackwell's identity? His connection to this Ascendant company?" "That's the weird part," Olivia replied. "When they started asking questions, he disappeared. MHP is apparently furious. They ended a long-term contract based on his representations." After thanking Olivia and ending the call, I turned to Mark. "This makes even less sense now. Someone created an elaborate deception to make it appear our company was being sold and deliberately damaged our business relationships. But there's no actual sale happening?" Mark was staring at one of the financial documents, his expression suddenly focused. "Emma, look at this. BSG Consulting, the company receiving those quarterly payments. The address listed here is a property in Harbor Springs." So Dad doesn't just know someone in Harbor Springs. He owns property there. That lakefront vacation house he bought 5 years ago. The one he said was an investment property that he rents out. I frowned, taking the document from him. "You think BSG Consulting operates out of Dad's vacation house?" "I think BSG Consulting might be Dad," Mark replied grimly, "or someone connected to him." The implications were staggering. If my father had been diverting company funds to himself beyond his declared compensation, it would explain the missing money. But it didn't explain the fake acquisition talks, the sabotage of our insurance partnerships, or the mysterious James Blackwell. Unless... "Mark, when did Dad buy that Harbor Springs property?" He thought for a moment. 5 years ago. Like I said, right after he had that health scare. The one that turned out to be just exhaustion, remember? I did remember. My father had collapsed at work, prompting a battery of tests that ultimately showed nothing seriously wrong. Afterward, he'd announced he was buying a vacation property to reduce stress and enjoy life more. And he paid cash for it, right? Over $2 million for prime lakefront property? Mark nodded slowly, realization dawning. Money that might have come from the company, I finished. Through these shell consultancies and inflated expense accounts. We stared at each other, the full implications sinking in. Our father, the paragon of business ethics as far as we had known, had potentially been embezzling from his own company for years. But that still doesn't explain what's happening now, Mark insisted. Even if Dad was taking money, why would he or anyone else create this fake acquisition scenario? Before I could respond, Grace knocked urgently on the conference room door. Emma, I have Midwest Health Partners legal counsel on the line. They're threatening to sue us for breach of contract and fraudulent representation. The next hour was a blur of crisis management, calming MHP's lawyers, assuring them that Wilson Family Pharmacy had never authorized anyone to discuss acquisition, plans, or contract termination, promising full cooperation with any investigation into the impersonation of our company's interests. By the time I hung up, Gregory Bennett had arrived with more pieces of the puzzle. Ascendant Healthcare Capital exists, he reported. It's a small private equity firm based in Chicago, specializing in healthcare acquisitions. But according to their general counsel, they have never employed or authorized anyone named James Blackwell, and they have no interest in acquiring Wilson Family Pharmacy. So Blackwell is using a real company's name to add legitimacy to his fraud, I mused. But who is he, and what's his connection to all this? Gregory hesitated, glancing between Mark and me. There's more. I had my investigator run a background check on everyone associated with BSG Consulting, the company receiving those regular payments from Wilson Family Pharmacy. BSG officially has only one employee, its founder and president, Barbara Sherman Goldberg. The name meant nothing to me, but beside me, Mark went very still. Dad's secretary, he said quietly. From before you joined the company, she retired. About 10 years ago. Gregory nodded. She did retire from Wilson Family Pharmacy, but according to state records, she then immediately founded BSG Consulting, which has had exactly one client for the past decade. Our company, I said, the pieces finally coming together. She's a front for Dad to funnel money out. That appears to be the case, Gregory confirmed. As for James Blackwell, we haven't identified him yet, but we're continuing to investigate. After Gregory left, Mark and I sat in stunned silence, trying to process what we'd learned. Our father had been systematically diverting funds from the company for years, using a trusted former employee as cover. But the current situation, the fake acquisition, the sabotage of our insurance contracts, remained a mystery. We need to talk to Dad, Mark said finally. Directly, face to face. No more speculation. I nodded in agreement. And we need to bring evidence. He'll deny everything otherwise. When? I glanced at my watch. Now, before this gets any worse. The drive to our parents' lakefront home was tense, both of us lost in our own thoughts. I couldn't reconcile the father I thought I knew, demanding but principled, tough but fair, with someone who would steal from his own company, let alone orchestrate an elaborate scheme to damage it. As we pulled into the circular driveway, I noticed a sleek black car I didn't recognize parked near the entrance. Are we expecting company? I asked Mark. He shook his head, looking equally puzzled. Mom didn't mention anyone visiting when I talked to her this morning. We approached the front door with growing unease. Before we could ring the bell, it swung open, revealing our mother in an elegant dress more suited to a business dinner than a quiet day at home. Emma, Mark, she greeted us, surprise evident in her voice. We weren't expecting you. Clearly you were expecting someone, I replied, nodding toward the unknown car. We need to speak with Dad. It's urgent. My mother hesitated, something like fear flickering in her eyes. Your father is resting. The doctor said he shouldn't be disturbed. Mom, Mark said firmly, we know about the money, about BSG Consulting. And Barbara Goldberg. We know Dad has been taking funds from the company for years. The color drained from her face. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do, I countered, stepping past her into the foyer. And I think you also know who James Blackwell is, and why he's trying to destroy our company's business relationships while pretending it's being sold. My mother's response was cut off by the sound of voices from the direction of my father's. Den, his distinctive deep tone, followed by another man's that I didn't recognize. Without waiting for permission, I moved toward the sound, Mark close behind me. I pushed open the den door to find my father sitting in his armchair, looking far more alert and energetic than a man supposedly requiring constant rest. Across from him sat a stranger, tall, polished, in an expensive suit that screamed corporate lawyer or investment banker. Both men looked up in shock at our entrance. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the stranger rose, extending his hand with practiced smoothness. You must be Emma and Mark. Your father has told me so much about you both. I'm James Blackwell, from Thornfield Capital. My blood went cold. This was the man who had been impersonating our family's interests, sabotaging our business relationships, creating the illusion of a company in crisis. And here he was, sitting comfortably in my father's den, apparently with his full knowledge and approval. Dad, I said, my voice dangerously calm, you have 5 minutes to explain what the hell is going on. The confrontation that followed would change everything, for our family, for Wilson Family Pharmacy, and for the inheritance that had nearly torn us apart. For several seconds, the room remained frozen in a tableau of shock and betrayal. My father's face had drained of color, while the man who called himself James Blackwell maintained his professional smile, though it no longer reached his eyes. Behind us, I heard my mother's sharp intake of breath as she entered the den. Emma. Mark, my father finally said, his voice steadier than I expected. This isn't how I wanted you to find out. Find out what, exactly? I demanded, maintaining my position by the door. That you've been embezzling from your own company for years, or that you're working with this man to deliberately sabotage Wilson Family Pharmacy? Which part weren't we supposed to discover? Emma, please, my mother interjected. Your father's heart seems to be working just fine, I cut her off, gesturing to my father, who looked far more vital than he had during any of our hospital visits. Remarkable recovery, Dad. Almost miraculous. My father sighed heavily, exchanging a glance with Blackwell before addressing us. You might as well sit down. This will take some explaining. Mark and I remained standing, united in our refusal to play along with whatever script my father had prepared. Mr. Blackwell, perhaps we should reschedule, my father suggested, but the other man shook his head. With respect, Robert, I think that ship has sailed. Your children have clearly done their homework. Continuing to obscure the situation will only make matters worse. He turned to us with a calculated frankness. I represent Thornfield Capital, a private investment firm specializing in healthcare acquisitions. Your father approached us 6 months ago about a potential purchase of Wilson Family Pharmacy. 6 months ago? Mark repeated incredulously. Before any of this succession drama even started? My father couldn't meet our eyes. I've been considering an exit strategy for some time. My health concerns are real, even if... He trailed off. Even if you've been exaggerating them to manipulate us? I finished for him. What about the money, Dad? The millions diverted through fake consulting companies to your vacation property? My mother stepped forward, her composure cracking slightly. That's a separate issue, Emma. Your father needed those funds for personal investments. Investments. Like paying for specialized medical treatments not covered by insurance, Blackwell supplied smoothly. Treatments that Mr. Wilson preferred to keep private from his family. I laughed without humor. You expect us to believe that? What treatments cost millions of dollars and require elaborate financial shells to hide? A heavy silence fell over the room. My father and mother exchanged another look, one I couldn't quite decipher, before my father spoke again. The money wasn't for me, he said quietly. It was for your mother. All eyes turned to Diane Wilson, who stood with perfect posture despite the weight of our collective gaze. For the first time, I noticed a slight tremor in her ordinarily steady hands. I was diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's disease 8 years ago, she stated, her voice clinical and detached, as if describing someone else's condition. We sought treatment from specialists across the country, experimental protocols not covered by insurance. The expenses were substantial. I felt the ground shift beneath me, certainties crumbling. Why keep it secret? Why not just tell us? Your mother didn't want your pity, my father answered. She didn't want to be seen as diminished or fragile. And the treatments were working. Her symptoms have remained minimal, managed through a combination of therapies that we continue to this day. Mark stepped forward, confusion evident on his face. But what does that have to do with selling the company now? Or with this succession battle you created? Blackwell cleared his throat. If I may? The financial situation has become more complex in recent years. The specialized treatments Mrs. Wilson requires have doubled in cost, while their effectiveness has begun to plateau. Additionally, there have been some investment setbacks. My father's jaw tightened, a flicker of genuine shame crossing his face. I made some poor decisions trying to grow the funds I'd set aside for your mother's. Kare. We need liquidity now, enough to establish a trust that will cover her medical needs for the rest of her life, regardless of what happens to me or to the business. So you decided to sell the company, I said slowly, pieces falling into place. But you knew I'd fight it, because I've invested my entire career in building it up. He nodded reluctantly. I thought if Mark were positioned as my successor, the transition to a sale would be smoother. He has less attachment to the day-to-day operations, less personal identity wrapped up in the business. Mark made a sound of disbelief. So I was never meant to actually run the company? I was just a placeholder until you could sell it out from under both of us? The intent was to provide for all of us, my father insisted. The sale would generate enough capital to secure your mother's care, with substantial portions set aside for both of you to pursue other ventures. I turned to Blackwell, whose calculated calm was beginning to irritate me. And your role in all this? Impersonating our family to sabotage our insurance contracts doesn't sound like standard acquisition procedure. For the first time, the Adenture polished executive looked uncomfortable. Thornfield prefers to acquire companies at advantageous valuations. Sometimes that requires creative approaches to market positioning. You mean fraud, I translated flatly. You deliberately damaged our business to drive down the purchase price. My father raised a hand in a placating gesture. The contract termination was meant to be temporary. Midwest Health would renew with the company under new ownership, with minimal disruption to patients. It was a financial maneuver, not sabotage. A financial maneuver that would have cost jobs, damaged our reputation, and potentially harmed the patients who rely on us. I countered, anger building again. All so you could squeeze a few more million out of the sale price. It's business, Emma, my father said tiredly. Sometimes difficult decisions must be made for the greater good of the family. Whose family? I demanded. Because from where I'm standing, you've betrayed everyone in this room. You lied to Mark about giving him the company. You tried to push me out of the business I built. You kept Mom's condition secret from us for years, depriving us of the chance to support her. and you've been stealing from the company that employs dozens of people who trust and depend on you." My mother stepped forward, her expression softening. "Emma, try to understand. Your father was protecting me, protecting all of us. He wanted to ensure my care without burdening you or Mark with the responsibility." "That wasn't his decision to make," Mark said quietly, surprising me with his firmness. "We're not children anymore. We deserved the truth." My father looked suddenly older, the weight of his deceptions visibly heavy on his shoulders. "Perhaps you're right, but what's done is done. The question now is how we move forward." I turned to Blackwell, who had been watching this family drama unfold with barely concealed calculation. "Thornfield Capital's offer is off the table. Whatever you thought you were buying, it's not for sale." He raised an eyebrow. "I admire your confidence, Ms. Wilson, but the reality is more complicated. Your father has already signed a preliminary agreement giving us exclusive negotiating rights for the next 30 days. If Wilson Family Pharmacy rejects our final offer without cause, there are substantial penalties." "Signed with what authority?" I challenged. "Dad doesn't have controlling interest anymore, remember? Any sale would require 75% shareholder approval, which he doesn't have without my support." Blackwell's composure slipped slightly. "The agreement was based on Mr. Wilson's representation that he speaks for the family interests. Then the agreement was obtained under false pretenses," I stated firmly. "Our lawyer will be contacting yours to clarify that point." My father leaned forward, his expression urgent. "Emma, be reasonable. This sale would solve everyone's problems. Your mother's care would be secured. You and Mark would have substantial capital to pursue whatever you want." "Except the business I've spent 8 years building," I interrupted. "The business that employs people I care about, that serves a community I'm part of. You're asking me to walk away from all of that because you made financial decisions without consulting any of us." The room fell silent again, the impasse clear. After a moment, Blackwell stood, gathering his materials with practiced efficiency. "I can see this is a family matter that requires further discussion," he said smoothly. "Robert, perhaps we should reconnect once you've had a chance to align with your children on the path forward." After Blackwell departed, the four of us remained. In the den, the weight of revelations and betrayals hanging heavy in the air. My mother was the first to speak. "I never wanted my condition to define our family's choices," she said quietly. "But the reality is, my care is expensive, and it will only become more so as time goes on." "You should have told us," Mark replied, his voice gentler than I expected. "We could have faced this together, as a family, instead of through all these lies and manipulations." My father sighed heavily. "I've handled this badly. I can see that now. But my concern for your mother's welfare is genuine, as is my worry about the financial burden her care represents." I paced the room, mind racing with implications and possibilities. "How much?" I finally asked. "How much do you need to secure Mom's care long-term?" My father named a figure that made my breath catch, substantial, but not astronomical given the company's current valuation. "The treatments she's receiving now cost nearly $200,000 annually, with increases expected as her condition progresses." I nodded slowly, an alternative path beginning to form in my mind. "There are other ways to address this without selling the company out from under us." "Such as?" my father asked skeptically. "A restructuring," I proposed. "The company creates a dedicated healthcare trust for Mom, funded through a percentage of annual profits. We bring her condition into the open, with her permission, and make Wilson Family Pharmacy a leader in supporting research for Parkinson's and other neurological conditions." My mother looked startled. "You would do that? Use the company to publicly support my cause?" "It's not just your cause, Mom. It's our family's cause now." I turned to my father. "As for the funds you've already diverted, we'll need to regularize Those transfers document them properly as loans or distributions to avoid potential legal issues. My father's expression wavered between resistance and relief. The company can't afford to fund both your mother's care and continue its expansion plans. We'll adjust the expansion timeline, I countered. Open 2 new locations in the next 3 years instead of 4. Delay some capital improvements. It's doable. Mark, who had been listening intently, finally spoke up. What about me? Where do I fit in this new vision? I met my brother's gaze directly. That depends on you. The offer I made before still stands. Join the company, learn the business from the ground up, earn a leadership role based on merit and contribution. But now there's a purpose beyond just carrying on the family name. There's Mom's care, there's our new mission supporting neurological research. Is that something you want to be part of? For the first time since this crisis began, a genuine smile crossed Mark's face. Actually, yeah, that sounds like something worth committing to. My father looked between us, confusion evident. You're willing to forgive everything? The deception, the attempts to push you out, the financial improprieties? Forgive? Eventually. Maybe, I replied candidly. Trust again? That will take time and concrete actions on your part. But write off the company and walk away? No. Why not? My father pressed. After everything that's happened, it would be simpler to take the money from the sale and start fresh elsewhere. I glanced around the room, at my mother, standing, straighter now that her secret was in the open, at Mark, looking engaged and purposeful for perhaps the first time in his adult life, at my father, bewildered that his children weren't following the path of least resistance. Because Wilson Family Pharmacy isn't just a business to me, I explained. It's not just a financial asset to be maximized. It's our legacy, yes, but it's also a community resource, a provider of essential services, an employer of people who depend on us. I've spent 8 years making it something more than a small family business, and I'm not walking away from that because you decided unilaterally that it should be sold. And, Mark added unexpectedly, because Emma's right. She's built something worth fighting for, something I'd like to be part of in a real way, not just as a figurehead or placeholder. My father fell silent, absorbing our unified front. My mother moved to stand beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder in a gesture of both support and gentle restraint. Robert, she said softly, perhaps it's time to truly let go, not by selling the company, but by acknowledging that Emma and Mark have their own vision for its future, one that includes caring for me, but doesn't require sacrificing everything we've built. For a long moment, my father didn't respond. Then, with visible effort, he nodded. I suppose I've been so focused on protecting this family that I failed to see how capable you both have become of protecting yourselves and each other. It wasn't quite an apology, but from Robert Wilson, it was as close as we were likely to get. I accepted it with a nod of acknowledgement, understanding that rebuilding trust would be a long and deliberate process. 3 months later, Wilson Family Pharmacy had weathered the storm created by my father's machinations and emerged stronger. Midwest Health Partners, after learning the truth about Blackwell's misrepresentations, not only renewed our contract, but expanded it, adding their Medicare Advantage members to our service agreement. The financial restructuring to support my mother's care was in place, with a transparent governance process that involved both Mark and me in all major decisions. Mark had surprised everyone, perhaps himself most of all, with his dedication to learning the business. His natural charisma and relationship-building skills, previously directed toward ill-fated ventures, proved valuable in expanding our community, outreach programs, particularly our new initiatives supporting Parkinson's research and patient advocacy. My father had stepped back completely from operational involvement, focusing instead on his role as chairman emeritus, and my mother's primary caregiver. The heart attack, while exaggerated for manipulative purposes, had been real enough to warrant the lifestyle changes he'd now embraced. As for me, I remained CEO, but with a renewed sense of purpose beyond just growth metrics and profitability. The company was now explicitly aligned with values I believed in: healthcare accessibility, employee well-being, and community support, while still maintaining the financial strength needed to secure my mother's care and our collective future. One unseasonably warm autumn evening, I found myself sitting on the deck of my parents' lakefront home, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and crimson. My mother joined me, moving more slowly than she once had, but with a dignity that transcended her physical limitations. "I never thanked you properly," she said, settling into the chair beside mine, "for finding a way to keep the company in the family while ensuring my care." I smiled, reaching over to cover her hand with mine. "You don't need to thank me, Mom. It's what families are supposed to do: support each other through challenges, not hide them behind secrets and manipulations." She nodded, a hint of regret crossing her face. "Your father and I came from a different generation. Illness was private, financial struggles were shameful. We thought we were protecting you by handling everything ourselves." "I understand the intention," I acknowledged, but the execution left something to be desired. A small laugh escaped her. "That's an understatement." She gazed out at the lake, her expression growing more serious. "You know, when your father first suggested passing the company to Mark, I supported him without question. Not because I didn't recognize your contributions, but because it was the path of least resistance. The traditional choice that wouldn't raise eyebrows or challenge expectations. And now?" I asked quietly. "Now I realize how narrow-minded that was. How unfair to you, yes, but also how limiting for the company itself." She turned to face me fully. "Wilson Family Pharmacy is stronger with you at the helm, Emma. Not because you're my daughter, but because you're the right person for the role, the one who sees beyond profit margins to the real purpose of what we built." Her words warmed me in a way that all my professional accomplishments never had. After years of fighting for recognition, of proving myself repeatedly against outdated expectations, my mother was finally seeing me clearly, not as the daughter, but as the leader I had become. The sound of laughter drew our attention to the shoreline, where Mark was skipping stones with his fiancée Jessica. Their wedding was planned for the spring, with the ceremony to be held right here on the lakefront property. Another change from our family traditions, another sign of the new reality we were creating together. "He's different since all this happened," my mother observed, following my gaze. "More grounded, more purposeful." "He needed a real challenge," I replied. "Not something handed to him because of birth order or gender, but something he had to earn, something with meaning, beyond status or title." "And you?" she asked. "Are you content with how things have resolved?" I considered the question seriously. The past 3 months had been exhausting, rebuilding business relationships, implementing the financial restructuring, establishing new governance procedures that prevented any single family member from making unilateral decisions about the company's future. At times, I'd questioned whether it wouldn't have been simpler to walk away with a settlement from the sale, to start fresh elsewhere without the weight of family complications. But then I'd visit one of our pharmacy locations, see the staff, engaged in their work, witness the relationships they'd built with patients who depended on us for their healthcare needs. I'd sit in meetings with Mark, watching him grow into his new role with unexpected dedication and insight. I'd review the progress reports from the Parkinson's research initiatives we were supporting, knowing that while they might not change my mother's prognosis, they could make a difference for countless others facing the same diagnosis. "Yes," I said finally. "I'm content. Not because everything is perfect or because all the hurt has been healed, but because we're building something meaningful together, something that honors the past while creating a better future." My mother squeezed my hand, tears shimmering in her eyes. That's all any parent really wants, for their children to build something better than what came before. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the water, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. What had begun as a battle over inheritance, over who was more deserving of my father's legacy, had transformed into something far more significant, a reckoning with old wounds, hidden truths, and the kind of family we wanted to be moving forward. The company that had almost torn us apart had ultimately brought us together, not through blind adherence to tradition or the path of least resistance, but through the harder, more rewarding work of creating a new reality based on transparency, mutual respect, and shared purpose. Wilson Family Pharmacy would continue as our family's legacy, but on new terms that recognized merit over birthright, contribution over entitlement, and the strength that comes from facing challenges together rather than hiding behind comfortable lies. For me personally, the victory wasn't just in retaining leadership of the company I'd built, but in transforming what that leadership meant, expanding it beyond profit margins and growth metrics to encompass the well-being of my family, our employees, and the community we served. As Mark and Jessica joined us on the deck, bringing with them the energy and optimism of new beginnings, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The inheritance I had fought for wasn't just the company itself, but the right to define its future, on my own terms that included my brother as a partner rather than a rival, my parents as advisors rather than controllers, and myself not as the daughter who had something to prove, but as the leader who had already proven herself through years of dedicated service and measurable results. Some might see our story as one of family conflict and business drama, of parents who favored one child over another until circumstances forced them to reconsider. But I prefer to see it as a story of evolution, of a family business that grew beyond its origins, of relationships that transformed through crisis, and of individuals who found the courage to create a new reality when the old one no longer served the greater good. That, to me, is the true inheritance worth fighting for. Not buildings or balance sheets or titles, but the opportunity to build something meaningful that honors the past while embracing a future of our own design. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.